Okay. So why don't we continue with Miguel? Miguel, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you fine, yeah.
Good. So what are your thoughts on this proposal? So we heard it's, people can relate to it. It's 50 euros. That even be discussed at the summit. What's your take?
But I think that the growing spreads between the treasury bonds in places like Italy and Germany really shows the market knows what we as politicians already know, that actually the current solutions, the ECB and ESM credit lines, are simply not enough. We need more money, but we also need to go beyond the direct and indirect health expenditures that are currently allowed in those instruments. So I think this is a really important proposal. I think it is in line with what Paolo Gentiloni has proposed today, also the Spanish non-paper that's been recently announced. And really, I think there are three important features to this, which I think are really quite striking. First is that this is grants and not national debt. I really think this is important because in the future, if these countries are saddled with all this legacy debt, it will be much harder for us to, face this on in the future. The second point is the population distribution, because this means that poorer countries will receive more right now, but it also means that if they want to pay less in the future, they will also they have an incentive to grow. They need to grow. And this is a very important incentive to eliminate moral hazard from the equation. And the third and final point I'd like to make is that this is focused on investment, because really, health expenditure is not enough. We should focus on digital transition, on climate change, but it's important to say that I think countries should be implementing these investments themselves, and it is important that no strings are attached, no conditionality on reforms, on austerity, because that would simply not be acceptable for a huge number of people, and it would put in question the social welfare state we have in Europe.
So the idea is that this is spent on European-wide programs managed by the Commission probably. Is that something you could agree to, or do you think it has to go back really straight into the national budgets and the countries need to make the decision how to spend that money?
I appreciate that the Commission and Europe as a whole needs to develop a Marshall Plan of consensual investments, consensual areas and programs in which to invest. What I think would be an advantage would be if there is ownership from the countries of these investments. So they are involved in deciding what are the investments, they are involved in implementing on the ground, because I think the people who are best placed to actually put on the ground those investments and making them work for the local economies are states and not bureaucrats in Brussels.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's very clear that we need a fiscal union to complete the economic and monetary union. But we need us to get a European Union with more ambition and that meets the challenges of our time. We need us to fight tax competition and tax havens within the European Union. But a fiscal union would mean that this solution had tax powers and it had redistribution. But the solution from Andrea Boitani has neither tax powers to the European Union nor redistribution. So I think that this doesn't need to be the beginning of a fiscal union. This does not need to be a reason to kill Andrea's idea. Yeah. We have other instruments which work in this sense. The BICC, which was recently announced to tackle lack of convergence. This is just an instrument to face a shock. In this case, it treats it as a common shock. I am completely in agreement with what Gabrielle said, that we need a solution for asymmetric shocks, because really, while this instrument treats the coronavirus as a common shock, actually we are facing a shock with asymmetric impacts. And some countries will be more affected than others, and this instrument will not be perfect in dealing with that, but perhaps it is what is most politically acceptable and feasible at this time. And so really, we must thank FES for the initiative and Andrea for the idea.
Thank you, Miguel. Very good point.